So we just talked a little bit about, using the opposite of what we could maybe do. I didn't really give it a name, but I just made sure that you knew it was kind of right next to it and it's the opposite of what it was. So here's the truth of the matter. Like I told you last Monday, when we're looking at these words, we really need to know the words opposite, adjacent, hypotenuse. We're going to need to know those this whole chapter. And we're still going to need to label them on our paper today. It's just going to be a little bit different because we always used to know the angle. And our section today, 8.3, we're actually going to be solving for the angle. Okay, so we're going to be solving for the angle. Please listen. Always have the angle answer be a whole degree. So if your calculator is telling you some sort of decimal, you round it all the way to the whole number. There should be no decimal after it. Please round to the whole place. Once again, this should be okay because you are working with it, but if you're using your phone or whatever, or even just online and you're using Desmos, please make sure, I kind of checked that before, but please make sure Desmos is in degree mode. And so we are going to be solving for the angle. So just a minute here. There's a few notes I would like you to take with me and write these down, and then a few examples, and then the homework should kind of go pretty easily. A couple of you have been turning in homework, and sometimes all I see is the answer. And I realize after the first or second problem, sometimes you think you know what you're doing. But if your answer is wrong, I have no idea. Like, did you mislabel the opposite side? Did you mislabel the hypotenuse? So please show your work, okay? So just real quick here. It's on the board behind me, but if we're going to use so, standing for sine, opposite hypotenuse, and usually we fill in a number right here. Remember, theta is our angle. And so usually we have a number to fill in there. But today, since we're solving for the angle, we're not going to have something to fill in there. But that means both opposite and hypotenuse will be known. And so we've got to figure out a way somehow to undo our sine function. And so there are a few functions out there that are there to undo trig functions. They happen to be called the inverse functions. And I kind of mentioned that, probably said that word a couple times when we were talking this morning, but we are going to be using the inverse functions all day today. So if you're doing a problem and you're not using the inverse on your calculator, that probably means you're doing something wrong. All right, so real quick, we're just going to do an example that comes from nowhere. I made it up. I wrote it on this paper. It does come from some triangle, but I didn't draw the triangle here. So let's say we had gone through our example and figured out that sine of our angle, which by the way we don't know, should equal the ratio. That must mean the opposite side had a length of 4 and the hypotenuse had a length of 5. If you notice here, like I said a moment ago, 4 and 5 are both numbers. We know both those numbers. But sine of theta, we don't know theta, and it's really weird. We can't divide by sine. That's what a lot of people want to do when I first start teaching this. They say divide both sides by sine. But sine cannot be left alone. Like if you try to type it in your calculator will give you an error message if you just try to use sine. And so to get rid of sine, we have to use the sine inverse. Now, hopefully the blue marker will look different enough on this paper, but sine and sine inverse are kind of like multiplication and division. If we have times 3 and divide by 3, they cancel each other out. So please look what I wrote on this side of the problem. I wrote sine inverse and then I wrote sine right next to each other. Whenever I write these two right next to each other, by the way, it has to be sine and sine inverse, okay? So just heads up for the next few examples. If sine and sine inverse are right next to each other, they cancel each other out. And if they cancel each other out, guess what I'm left with? Just theta, which by the way represents the angle. But this is math class. And by the way, remember how my original said sine here and I just put sine inverse there to get rid of sine? If I do something to one side of the equation, I have to do it to the other side. So on the other side, I'm going to write sine inverse. It has to come first. Okay, your calculator, math, we don't like it if that does not come first. So sine inverse of 4/5. And once again, I spent a few minutes talking to you guys before we got going. And so hopefully you know either A, how to find sine inverse on whatever calculator you're using. Please listen up. If not, hit pause on the video right now and go back to the live Google Meet, where you can actually see me and talk to me and say, Miss Jebs, I didn't know what to do before, but I really need to know because I need you to get this answer right now. So on your calculator, you're typing in this right here, sine inverse, and then hopefully your calculator gives you an open parentheses and you're able to type in a fraction. So sine inverse of 4/5 actually equals 53.1301023. Okay, the calculator probably keeps on going, but please remember, we are going to round to a whole number. Okay, round to a whole number. Round to the whole degree, because we don't really like to talk about, I mean, we could find like 37.8 degrees, but it's a lot easier just to say 37 degrees or 38 degrees. And so once again, our answer was 53.1. That 0.1 means we should keep our answer at the number it was. And so since we're rounding, actually, I probably should have used a squiggly equal sign right there. Our angle would equal 53 degrees. So just so you know, I kind of briefly mentioned this, but there is an inverse for each function. So if you decide that you need to use sine in order to solve for the angle, you must use sine inverse. If you decide that your ratio would give you cosine, you have to use cosine inverse. And if you decide that your ratio would have been opposite over adjacent, and therefore you should have been using tangent, you should use tangent inverse. All right? So please make sure you know that each and every one of them has its own inverse. Now, I set this up to look like the homework. Hopefully, I have room on the side of my paper to kind of work through and solve to show you how to do this and how to solve these answers. Of course, I'm waiting in Google Meet if you have any questions. And the homework tonight, the way the homework does it, it puts a question mark where it doesn't know the angle. Now, what I would recommend is go ahead and copy this down first of all. So hit pause and copy. Since we don't know this angle, I am going to label on the outside of the triangle, I am going to label that angle X. Because X is usually what we try to solve for when we don't know things. And so for every single answer tonight, you might be solving for X because you're going to make it up. I suppose if you want to switch it up and switch it to A or B or whatever. But I'm going to label that angle X because now this is a lot like the other day. I need you to label 3 sides. Those 3 sides would have the words of hypotenuse, adjacent, and opposite, whichever order you find them the easiest. Please remember the first one we usually like to find is the hypotenuse because it is the easiest. Not necessarily the easiest, it's kind of the most important. So we're going to put our finger on the right angle, which is not labeled as a letter today, that's okay. We're going to put our marker on the right angle, and then I'm going to go across from that. So next to this long side right here, remember the hypotenuse is also supposed to be the longest side. But here's the trick. When there's only 2 numbers, you can't just automatically say this is the hypotenuse because it's bigger, okay? We have to know that it's across from the right angle. So 23.3 we did determine is the hypotenuse. Again, it depends on which one you like next. But I'm going to say what's next to, and your options are either this one, which we already wrote hypotenuse, so don't write anything else, or this one, and next to is the word adjacent. So right there, I'm going to write adjacent. And then we've got to go across from X. Up here where my finger is kind of covering up, the 13.6 is across, and therefore it is opposite. Just like the other day, although the other day it was an X on one of our sides is going to have no information on it. It is not going to be important. So even though we want to label it and want to know what side it is, we're going to cross it out because I cannot use adjacent. So if I look behind me on the board right here, both cosine and tangent use adjacent somewhere in it. That means I have to use sine. So you guys know I always like to write the original so I know I'm plugging things in correctly. So I have sine of theta equals opposite over hypotenuse. Please look through here. It is a little bit of a trick question. What is my angle? Thank you. I don't know it. I have either called it X, or if you would like to call it question mark, you may call it whichever one you want. It's kind of weird, guys. We usually call angles capital letters. That's why this looks like a big X and it looks like a big X here. What is the value of my opposite leg? You guys correctly told me opposite was that 13.6. And what is the value of my hypotenuse? Thank you, 23.2. And so now I see sine of x equals 13.3 over 23.2. How can I get rid of sine? Yep, just a few minutes ago we did it right here. In order to get rid of sine, we have to pick sine inverse. In order to get rid of sine, we have to pick sine inverse. So if I write sine inverse on one side of the equation, I have to write it on the other side of the equation. And sorry guys, I know. You have to squeeze it in first. I'm going to make it look a lot better in just a moment here. Your calculator will not be happy if you try to type in 13.6 divided by 23.2 and then hit your sine inverse button. What happens with sine inverse and sine? They cancel each other out. You are correct, which means that on the left side of my equation, since sine inverse and sine cancel each other out, I'm just left with x. On this side, I'm going to rewrite it so you know what we should get. I have the sine inverse of 13.6 over 23.2. That's the ratio I found. And so right here, this is telling me to find my answer. I just have to go to my calculator. Once again, your calculator, if you haven't changed anything or turned it off, or especially with Desmos, if you haven't switched things around, please make sure you pick the sine inverse function, not just regular sine. And we're going to type in 13.6. And sorry guys, I'm reading upside down. 13.6 divided by 23.2. And my calculator right now is saying 35.88829755528. Again, yours might have more decimal places than that or less, but it doesn't matter since we're working with an angle here. We want our angle to be written to a whole degree. So the 35.8 would tell us to round up. So our answer is going to be approximately, and sorry guys, I forgot the little squiggly equal sign again. I will not be opposed if you forget to. Our answer for this problem, x would equal 36 degrees. All right. Do not think because the two examples I've given us so far, we used sine inverse, that's always the function you should use on your calculator. Please remember, we have 3 trig functions, and so we have 3 inverse functions. And so you've got to be careful about sine, opposite, adjacent, hypotenuse. Are you using sine, cosine, tangent? Because whichever one you're using, you have to pick the correct inverse to help you solve. And so let's look at this answer this example right here. Go ahead and pause and copy it down. All right, once again, sometimes it really helps us to have the angle labeled on the outside. So I'm going to call it x and put a big box around x. Please go across from the right angle, right over here. Across from the right angle is what leg? Good, the hypotenuse. We're going to write it there, but some of you might realize we're already going to be crossing it off. And if we're already crossing it off, we actually know that we can't use either sine or cosine. I'm actually going to be using tangent, and we already know that for this problem. So right here we have tangent. But we don't know yet because we got to be very careful about labeling our sides. So put your finger on x and go across the triangle from it. If we go across the triangle from it, that is our opposite leg. And go back to x right next to it. Not the side that we had determined was the hypotenuse, but the other part that's right next to it. I'm going to write that one kind of sideways just because it's on my paper. So sorry if it looks a little bit weird when I put it up. We have opposite and adjacent. And x is our angle that we know. We've already determined that we're supposed to use tangent. So I'm going to write tangent of theta equals opposite over adjacent. And so I'm going to write tangent of my angle. But do I know my angle this time? So I'm going to write tangent of x equals opposite is 6.8. Adjacent is 5.6. Okay, would you agree with that? Opposite 6.8, adjacent 5.6. Tangent of x equals 6.8 over 5.6. And how do we get rid? Oh yeah, be careful. Since we're using tangent, guess what we have to pick? Tangent inverse. Please listen up, ladies and gentlemen. Sine inverse will not get rid of tangent. So you have to pick tangent inverse. And again, my writing looks really sloppy because how I wrote it in there. But tangent inverse cancels out tangent. And so if I am very careful, and I'm going to rewrite it so you know what we should do, Just like sine, tangent inverse has to come first. And so we're going to find tangent inverse of 6.8 over 5.6. And again, if I do that on my calculator, I always like to read out the first few examples so you know you're typing it into your calculator correctly as well, and that you're getting the right answer, so that later on when you move on and have to do the homework by yourself, you know you're doing it right. Our answer is 50.52754015. And again, it might go on a few more, but please remember, since we're solving for an angle, we are going to round to a whole degree. The 0.5 tells us to round up. This time I'll remember to put my squiggly equal sign. So our angle should equal approximately 51 degrees. For this example, our answer should equal approximately 51 degrees. All right, guys, one more I want to go through just to make sure we're getting okay, and that way you're following along and you're able to label the sides correctly, and then that way, again, when you're doing the homework by yourself, you have some confidence. Please remember, I will be on the Google Meet the whole time, and so I'll be there and able to answer questions if you have them. Please don't be afraid to come back. And actually, you will want to listen to the end of this video because there is something very, very important I am going to say. So, again, labeling our unknown. Oh, I don't think I had showed you this one yet just because of other things I had done. So if you need to pause and copy it down. Again, anytime we have an unknown angle, it might help us to label it X. Put your finger on the right angle and go across from it. That would be our hypotenuse. Put your finger on the angle we had, go across from it. That would be opposite. Put your finger on the angle we had and go right next to it, the one that is not the hypotenuse. That would be adjacent. What leg do we know nothing about? Good. We don't know about our opposite leg. And therefore, if we have adjacent and hypotenuse, we're going to be picking our cosine function. So the cosine of x equals adjacent over hypotenuse. Do we know our angle? Okay, all of today we don't know our angle. Not a single time today are you going to know your angle. So if you ever plug a number in there today, you're wrong. Okay, cosine of x adjacent we determined was our 6.3 leg. Our hypotenuse is our 7.7. And just like I've mentioned a few times, but I want to put it up here several times so that we know, we don't just pick sine inverse every time we're solving today. We have to know whatever function we're using. So we're using cosine. Therefore, we should use cosine inverse. And so if I write cosine inverse on each side, please remember I must write it first. Cosine inverse and cosine cancel each other out. But on the right side of my equation, I get the cosine inverse of 6.3 over 7.7. And again, typing that in my calculator, I'll read the whole thing just so you know you're getting the right answer. My calculator is telling me 35.096802122. Again, there's some more numbers possibly after that, depending on what calculator you happen to be using. But being that we're supposed to round to the whole degree, it looks like I would get 35 as my answer. Again, that is an approximate answer. So 35, about 35 degrees. Oops, sorry guys. I was saying 35 and started to write the 5 first. About 35 degrees. Okay. All right. So if you noticed the other day we did some warm up together, I said that was your attendance. As I was doing the video, you were supposed to check back in with me. But being that we've been doing the SOHCAHTOA thing a few days, I wanted to make sure that you kind of just watched the entire video, which means you haven't had to click back over to the Google Meet with me. So there's going to be 2 things that you have to do. Number 1, right now that you're done with the video, you're going to click back over to the Google Meet and just tell me And different people, even though we all started the video at the same time, there might be other people in the Google Meet, there might not be. But you're going to come back to the Google Meet and tell me how you kind of think the last few days have been going as far as my class. Are you understanding SOHCAHTOA? Is it making sense? There's a few of you that when you do that check-in, I got to talk to you about a couple other things, because a couple of you still have your Chapter 7 test to take. That was something we took before Easter break, and some of you were not checking in daily and stuff like that, and so you didn't know you were supposed to have a test, but we're supposed to have a test on that, and I really need you to do it. That's why some of your grades are so low. So you're going to come back to the Google Meet, and again, there is homework on this same topic and idea today. Not too long, just like the few other days, and I hope that you are able to get it done by 10. So please go back to the Google Meet, talk to me for a few minutes, and then start working on the homework to make sure that you get your participation points. There's going to be something else I tell you as you're checking in for homework. Thanks. See you in a minute.